Okay, because I have my share up. Okay, I can see the recording. All right. So we're going to center and come into focus. And so if you can put yourself in the most comfortable position, I'm going to ask that you close your eyes at this time. I'm going to ask that you take about 3 to 4 seconds to breathe in through your nose. And then I'm going to ask you to release through your mouth. See if you can get as close to 8 seconds as possible with your release. We're going to do that again. Take the time to relax all of the muscles within your body. Focus on the thoughts and the experience that we're going to have today, honoring, reflecting, and remembering Black history. I'm going to invite you to be open to what this time has to offer to you. So we're going to breathe in through the nose again and go ahead and release through your mouth. Excellent. And hopefully you've been able to come into focus. If you need to do this throughout our time together, feel free. We're also going to do this one more time again after our video. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is multicultural awareness and diversity. And you may say, why are we talking about that with Black history? One of the things that we find that is helpful is to really gain an understanding of our own makeup. What are we actually being influenced by to have the certain thoughts that we do have, whether you're a person of color or not? And so I'm just going to read this. It is common for feelings of offense to be influenced not only by the impact of current experiences, but also past experiences, some similar to the current experience in one or various ways. Efforts made to identify and explore these past experiences can help individuals respond in a healthier way to their current experiences and effectively communicate their feelings in ways to help bring about change and an improved experience. And so we are all about improved experience, a better life, and better understanding so that we don't go backwards and we continue to move forward. And just quickly, I'm not going to go over all of these. But as we see here, there are a lot of different things that make up our background as well as our experiences, how we form our beliefs, and how we live our lives, and how we're teaching our children how to live their lives and respect other people and other cultures. Okay, and some questions to ponder. I heard Rhonda suggested earlier that you have pen and paper available if you want to be fully engaged and have some things to think about. These are a few questions and a cultural self-assessment that you can look at. What aspects of my cultural identity do I identify or value with most? What messages did I receive about my family or my family's culture, identity growing up directly or indirectly? And how does this influence of my view of the world and other people in it positively or affect or negatively? And I'll leave that for a minute for anyone who wants to get that down, that information. Screenshots is definitely okay here. Um, But one of the things I want to talk about is a lot of different things, prejudice, discrimination, that we all have experienced. But speaking towards the grief, the disenfranchised grief perspective, when I dive into that, microaggression, subtle and often subconscious denigrating messages within brief everyday exchanges. Basically, when we offend others without intending to do so, is often many times throughout uh, history where this is happening and is still happening. And a lot of times in situations where race, people of color are around, this happens to us all of the time by people who are not really understanding how they behave in this manner, where you make a remark or you're very dismissive. Why are you still talking about that? It wasn't you. It didn't happen to you. You know, that was then, this is now. I'm just being dismissive to the experience that we still carry from Black history, from Africa, from Africans coming here, being enslaved, put on ships, those images, those thoughts that we still have to live with in some circumstances that people of color experience, specifically Black people, which again, it reminds us of that. And being dismissive because it's not directly happening to you, or you have the inability to really understand why we care, this often happens. And then racism, we know the house that race have built, the divide to say who's worth, who's better, who's more important. People that are not like me, they're below me, they're beneath me. And oftentimes we can communicate this unintentionally or intentionally, because it may be embedded in the fiber of our being and our mind, and we don't understand how we are helping support the house that race in fact built. Okay, one of the journal questions, I had several, but I think this one will be most important for our time together, for all of us, is in what ways can I change my perspective in light of my increasing cultural empathy and understanding of people from various backgrounds? And I put that question out there because it can work both ways. Of course, Black people have been oppressed, other cultures have been as well. And so I want us to think about that in honoring Black history and those people who are the beneficiaries of people being enslaved, to also think about that as well. So again, this is our journal and reflection question that will take some time after listening to a video that I'm going to share. So again, in what ways can I change my perspective in light of my increasing cultural empathy and understanding of people from various backgrounds? All right. So talking about disenfranchised grief. So anytime that there is some type of loss, there will be grief that actually occurs. This phrase was created by Dr. Kenneth Doka in 1989. He wrote a whole book and constantly teaches about it. Disenfranchised grief is grief that people experience when they incur loss that is not or cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. Grief can be intensified when it is hidden, potentially leading to complicated grief. So, for examples that most people would be able to relate to is the death by miscarriage, a stillbirth, death of an ex-spouse, and then death caused by suicide or addiction. So, typically, if somebody has a suicide, if you will, somebody will say, well, they caused it upon themselves, but it's still grief, it's still a form of loss. And a lot of times people can't be very vocal about that or unacknowledged with miscarriage or stillbirth. And let me say, I'm not monitoring the chat, Rhonda, if you can help me with that. But if there is something that's said in this space that makes sense, resonates with you, feel free to thumbs up, heart, etc. Definitely welcomed here. Uh-oh. So features of disenfranchised grief, and I will talk more about it with Black history as we go further. The relationship is not socially recognized. The loss is not.
Rosalind, question real quick. Can you share that? Is the name of the book Disenfranchised Grief? That's a comment in
No,
the chat box. What's the name of the book?
no, it is not. It's not. And I'll give the resource. He's if
Later.
you
Okay.
look, yeah, I'll give a resource for the person that's asking. I'll put it in the chat. Okay. Once I do the video, if it's okay, Rhonda.
Oh, sure.
So, all right. So, features of the disenfranchised grief. The loss is not socially acknowledged, circumstances of the loss. The griever is excluded. Different grieving styles, culturally, practice is not supported. And so, disenfranchised grief actually silences the bereaved, the griever. And so the root word of bereaver is to the bereft. That means that you've been robbed of something, something has been taken away from you. And so a lot of times when you're in environments where, as a person of color, and you have experienced something that is current, and you go to express that, and people are telling you to silence that because it's not you, why are you still asking for reparations when you've watched other people get them? This is a form of individuals feeling like they have to be silenced, they can't talk about it, no one understands them. And the most important thing about a loss is being able to have it acknowledged a lot of times. Not that it'll change the actual circumstance, but it's a lot different when you're not able to vocalize or express it or memorialize it. And you have people that don't understand it or they feel you're not worthy. So, how have African Americans, Blacks experienced disenfranchised grief? Often, Africans and African Americans were not allowed to publicly acknowledge the passing of men and women and children for the fear of being whipped, abuse of their own children, or punishment of death. And so, I want to invite us to sit in that for just a moment. If we can imagine the early 1400s going freely going to work to own land and pay off debt, and then we move it into the 1500s and the 1600s, where people seeing this now as a way to actually make money for basically free labor and to rid people of their freedom, their lives, to enslave their children permanently, and then you're watching your family die, your children be raped or killed, and you dare not say a word. You dare not try to fight back. Bullet two, unacknowledged privilege that slavery paid for. So, yet in past times and still in current, the denial of any form of reparations, the denial of years and years to take for an apology of Jim Crow laws and slavery as if it didn't even exist. I want us to sit there and think about it for a moment. And so, a lot of times, even with the prison system, I don't know if people watch like the 13th, that basically around the 13th Amendment, just how the prison system and jails and education, voter registration, how things were all set up to keep a particular group of people down and to keep them down so that they would be able to obtain free labor, all in the message, honestly, of greed, to be constantly told that you're nothing, you're not important, that you're ugly, your only worth is to be an entertainer, and that you have no value. Your education is not important, where you live is not important. And this all relates back to that time period. And being dismissive of that is a continual perpetuation of disenfranchised grief, where when if we brought these things up, sometimes it's not accepted. People are most people are not standing in line trying to cheer those that are mourning or still grieving this loss or having such experiences. Being a part of this meeting, working with race and faith is one of the ways that we can be active about learning, doing better, and getting better. But many people are not. And so I just want us to be sensitive to that. That when you have the one token Black person that actually got the scholarship or they got the position in a job, why you're not satisfied? You have a seat at the table now. You finally got a Black president. Be happy. And yes, is it progress? Yes, there is some progress there. Is it enough? No, it is not. So we're inviting you to allow those of us who are experiencing grief and loss because of the past that is still part of our present and future, to allow us to be able to express that. And when you hear remarks that are dismissive, that has that microaggression, that you stand up and be an advocate, not a participant in your silence, that you teach your children history, Black history. I'm going to share a video with you And I'm jumping ahead just so that you can be reflective of as you listen to the video. I think it'll have more impact. So again, the question is here. In what ways can I change my perspective in light of increasing cultural empathy and understanding of people from various backgrounds? And then if you don't want to answer that question, I'm going to ask that after the video, we'll take a moment to breathe and focus, but we'll take also 60 to 85 seconds to allow you just to write whatever your raw, natural feelings, emotions are, to actually just write those and see what you come up with. So I'm going to stop this share, Rhonda. um, do you want me to record the video that I'm going to play or stop the recording? Rhonda.
I heard you. I'm trying to write the question in the chat box.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's following you. I'm just trying to make sure people have that when it's off the screen. But no, I just keep going. I think keep showing the recording. I think that'll work. It's
Okay.
only because some people have want to they can't join now, but they want to process and see this later. So
Okay. So I'm going to stop this share and get the video for us.
All communities share common narratives, stories about where we come from, how we got here, what kind of values sustain us as a community with a viable future. When something goes wrong in a community, we often look to these narratives for clues and insights into how communities can deal with adversity and create a vision for a better future. The stories told in this film you're about to see demonstrate the strength of oral histories, family stories, remembrances of things past, and their ability to inform, educate, and enlighten a direction for the future. We welcome you to the National Civil War Museum African American Oral History Project.
Again, it sort of sounds odd from contemporary standards, but slavery was a business, and at the point in time in which young enslaved children could be monetized, could work, they were taken away from their mothers and they were put to work.
During slavery, records were kept on the plantations that enumerated the slaves not by name, but by gender and age. So that was prior to them being, enumerated in the census. I guess my fascination with Ephraim is that for someone who was born property, to actually see that slave schedule was just very emotional for me. So to have someone who was born property to someone end up owning all this property was fascinating. When I came across that, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, even though this man was not a blood relative, he became family. And for my great-grandmother, it was important to preserve his legacy.
Ephraim Newsom Slaughter was born in 1846 in North Carolina as a slave on a Newsom plantation, but he ran away and joined the USCT, the 37th USCT in North Carolina. After the Civil War, he came to Harrisburg in 1868. He became a member of the Bethel AME Church, of which he was a lifelong member.
It's interesting because the Pettiford, and that's my maiden name, the Pettiford family originated from England. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was an indentured servant. We have some pictures in a magazine that one of my cousins was able to get when he purchased his wife with pence, which was interesting. And his indentured owner was the person who signed the papers, which was very, very interesting.
There's a tendency when we speak of persons of African descent in the antebellum period, before the Civil War, as being enslaved, that we don't speak about the free population. But even within the enslaved population, there's its tendency not to have an appreciation for their sophistication. We want to think of the ignorant slave as the example of all the slaves. And the idea that since it was illegal for them to read and write, that therefore they all could not read and write. That's actually inaccurate in understanding the history of these people. So there are a number of myths where we're grouping all persons of African descent together as enslaved, or among the enslaved as ignorant and illiterate. So that's an unfair grouping. And it's very good in this project, this oral history project, that we actually have a representative of those soldiers who were enslaved and those soldiers who were free men before the war.
It was a fairly common practice with some that slaveholders would take some of their enslaved people and just hire them out and then receive back the wages. And that's what happened with Robert. He started in Charleston, again, when he was 12. He worked just doing little odds and ends, was a lamplighter, worked in a hotel, one that was curiously named Planters Inn, which perhaps foreshadowed some events in his future, but ended up really being attracted to the water, to the docks. He loved the water. He had been hired out by his master. His master was a little bit further south in Beaufort, South Carolina. He worked on this boat, sent his wages back to his master. He was married. He had a young daughter, my great-grandmother Elizabeth, and he had freedom on his mind.
We know that the dream of freedom was very much alive in enslaved people like Ephraim Slaughter and Robert Smalls, as well as freed people like George Hezekiah Imes. All lived a heroic commitment to the freedom of others and the building of a free community. We hear from Mrs. Mary Braxton discussing her great-great-grandfather, George Hezekiah Imes.
In March of 1865, at the age of 20, he left home to join the Civil War as a sergeant. He was Company D, 43rd U.S. Colored Troops.
Okay.
He saw action at the battles such as Petersburg, the Crater, the Battle of Richmond, and then his unit was privileged to ultimately chase down General Lee's rebel army and witness the final surrender.
He had negotiated with his wife's master to buy their freedom, had put a down payment on their freedom, $700 for both of them, which probably about $25,000 in today's dollars. He had the money, he knew he wanted to be free, he was trying to figure out how to get it. This opportunity presented itself, and he had prepared. He was a master at sailing that boat. He had learned all the nuances of the harbor, where the mines were laid, what the passcodes were, and saw an opportunity. And I think the emotions had to have been just, again, just dramatic. To start off with, he and his wife Hannah had agreed that if for some reason the effort failed, they were going to blow the boat up. They had lined the boat with dynamite. They knew that if they were caught, that they would be killed and tortured in probably particularly grotesque fashion as an example to other enslaved people to prevent them from doing it. So it was do or die. I always also say it's one thing to know how to do what Robert Smalls did, to miss all the mines and to maneuver and everything, but to do it under those conditions in the middle of the night and, really literally a life or death proposition. So I can only imagine, I've thought a lot about what they must have felt approaching Fort Sumter, which was the last fort and the largest fort. It's where the Civil War began. And just enormous, anxiety, fear. The cannons from Fort Sumter could have easily just blown the boat to smithereens. They heard, as the story goes, they heard, they did the appropriate signals. They heard pass planter. They went on the normal course. Now, they needed to veer off to get to where the Union blockade was, but they went as long as they could along the traditional sort of path of where the Confederate boats would, and then at the last second veered. At that point, the sentries at Fort Sumter realized that something was going on and trained their cannons on the planter, but luckily it was beyond. And as the planter approached, it was the USS Onward was the name of the ship that was at the blockade. And as they pulled up to that ship, I mean, just the extraordinary, just jubilation, joy, just, it's hard to fathom how they must have felt, because they were free. They had dreamt of it for, I'm sure, every enslaved person dreamed of being free. They had an opportunity, they took it, they seized it, and when that happened, it must have just been just extraordinary.
Very significant, the 32nd United States Colored Troops, Ephraim Slaughter's in, they are deployed in Butler's Army and become a part of Butler's Army of the James. They are involved in campaigns against Richmond, and Butler's Army of the James would capture the closest position to Richmond, September 29th, 1864, in the Battle of New Market Heights. They would go on, this 37th, to be a part of a detachment of the 25th Army Corps that would go down to North Carolina and capture Fort Fisher, which is near Wilmington, North Carolina. And they would go on to capture Wilmington. So very successful campaigns. The most notable of this in really making the press was the Battle of New Market Heights. The Battle of New Market Heights was considered a position that could not be taken, very formidable position. It had been dug in over a period of years and had some veteran Confederate troops defending it. The Federal Army, led by General Benjamin F. Butler, the Army of the James, and these African-American soldiers take the fort. 14 men of African descent would earn and receive the Medal of Honor for their actions in 2 days of battle, the 29th and the 30th of September of 1864. And Ephraim Slaughter would be witness to this. Again, this esteem, he's a part of an army that is very accomplished. When he's in North Carolina in operations, another part of the 25th Army Corps, which George Imes would be a member of, would capture Petersburg. Another part would capture Richmond, but in the case of Imes, he would actually be with the group that captures Petersburg and then goes on the chase of Robert E. Lee. And so they would stop Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia just south and west of a place called Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, in the early morning of April 9th, 1865. They would engage the Army of Northern Virginia, with the Pennsylvania Regiment being in the lead, the 41st United States Colored Troops. It's a 5-hour skirmish. They defeat Lee's army or prevent them from moving forward, and Lee discerns that he can no longer continue to prosecute the war, and he would decide to surrender to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April 9th, 1865, because he was stopped by the 25th Army Corps, 41st out of Pennsylvania being the lead element, and the 42nd, George Imes, is there.
I guess he just wanted to be a patriot and to fight in the Civil War, to serve the country and fight the enemy. He had 4 cousins who were also fought in the Civil War.
Can you give us their names and maybe what they did?
Well, I just know that Esau Imes was in Company K, the 5th Infantry, and Henry was in Company B, the 22nd Infantry. He's the one that was killed at Dutch Gap. James was the Buffalo Soldier, and he was in Company K, the 9th Infantry. And Oliver was in, but we have no information on what unit he was in.
he received a reward for delivering the planter to the United States. And particularly in the North, he was received as a war hero. He was perhaps the first real war hero of the Civil War. And there were parades in New York and Boston. He was like a hero. He could have very easily leveraged that fame and just lived a very comfortable life. In fact, he deserved that. I mean, he had earned that right. But then he went back and he signed up with the Army. There was some debate because at that point when Robert came back, the Army didn't really accept formerly enslaved Africans. So he started with the Army, he ended up with the Navy, but the point is that he wanted to fight for the freedom of all enslaved Africans. He wanted to extend a privilege to them that he had fought for.
The massive migration and relocation by more than 6 million African Americans from the rural South to the cities of the North, Midwest, and West after the Civil War and Reconstruction and well into the next century had a huge impact on their urban life in the United States. Driven from their homes by unsatisfactory economic opportunities and the harsh segregation laws, many blacks headed north, where they found advantages that did not exist in the South. Harrisburg saw its black population expand exponentially over time. Migrants were forced to deal with poor working conditions and competition for living space, as well as systemic racism and prejudice.
My grandmother came to Harrisburg when she was 6 years old. She came to Harrisburg from Mississippi. And she has told me, as others have told her, that her father, as a slave, was taken from Virginia to Mississippi. And that's how her family got to Mississippi. And she was born in Mississippi. Her grandfather, after the Civil War, went from Harrisburg to Mississippi to gather up his family again and brought his family to Harrisburg. That was the Cooper family, which is an old family in Harrisburg.
During Reconstruction, one of the most important organizations, Equal Rights League, but actually in the congressional records, you'll see them referred to as the Loyal League, the Civil War name of this organization. And they're organizing in the South, and they're addressing problems, men like Joseph Rainey and Robert Elliott, who become congressmen in South Carolina. And in Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, African Americans in the state legislature, they establish public education. State-funded public education. And so there's this role that African Americans in Reconstruction are playing in making sure that every child is being educated in their respective states. And that's probably their major contribution from the Reconstruction era.
After the war, he got into politics. He was elected to the South Carolina House and Senate for a number of terms, and there he created in South Carolina the first free, compulsory, statewide public school system in the country. He was not allowed as an enslaved person to learn how to read and write. He desperately wanted that. He wanted those skills. It said that after he was free, he hired 2 tutors. One that he met with at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and then he went, off to battle and to work. And then at night he had another tutor. He sent his daughter, my great-grandmother, up to New England to a finishing school, a prep school, to give her education and training. That was very important, but he didn't stop there. He, created the first public school system as we know it today. So that was outstanding.
But men like Joseph Rainey and Robert Elliott are very sophisticated men. When you read their speeches from the floor of the House, in particular in April of 1871, where there was legislation concerning these terrorist activities led by, most people refer to as the Ku Klux Klan at that time, but there are other organizations. But there are outrages being committed against the African American community. And General Benjamin F. Butler has written anti-Klan legislation, President Grant has requested Congress not to adjourn before they pass this legislation. And so you get Rainey and Elliott, these two African Americans who really spearheading and speaking for the African Americans to get this legislation passed in April of 1871. Then later in Reconstruction, a very important piece of legislation that gets passed is the Civil Rights Act of 1875, also written by Benjamin F. Butler, who's now a congressman from Massachusetts. Now, these pieces of legislation are on top of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, with the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, 14th Amendment recognizing native-born citizenship, and also equal protection under the law. And that was critical in the anti-Klan legislation of April of 1871, because it was really enforcement of the 14th Amendment. And then you get the 15th Amendment, which says clearly that men of African descent have the right to vote. So these are the accomplishments of the Loyal League. Their goal was to end the tyranny of slavery, gain their rights as citizens. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments is evidence that they succeeded at what they sought out to do. The Loyal League was highly successful, and they become a target of these terrorist organizations, and they are the target. And when you read the congressional records, they say the problem is the Loyal League. And why the Loyal League? Because they are organizing in the South. They're putting people together with an agenda, and that agenda is truly to make America better, and that's their major accomplishment.
Welcome back. We're going to take this moment to breathe and to refocus. So I'm going to ask that you clear your space, calm your body, and we're going to take a 3 to 5 second breath in, and we're going to release that through our mouth. I'm going to breathe in again through our nose, 3 to 5 seconds. And we are going to release. Before we begin discussing and talking, we have the question in the chat. If you do not want to reflect on the question that is in the chat, in what ways can I change my perspective in light of my increasing cultural empathy and understanding of people from various backgrounds, specifically today, African and African Americans, Black history? You can begin to write a reflection of your immediate responses and thoughts. And if you are going to decide to just write, what I would like you to consider in your writing is just how you feel about what you heard. And we're going to give about 1 to 2 minutes. And Rhonda will do our temperature check after that for the room of how we're feeling.
As you're writing, just again, think about where you are, what's going on with your heart right now, what's going on with your emotions, what is that information bringing up for you, where are you experiencing the conversation, the talk about disenfranchised grief, and then hearing the stories we just heard and what you already know, your own memory of certain events in history. How are you processing the information through your mind? How are you processing it through your soul or belief space? What's most alive for you right now? And when you're ready, maybe you can indicate in the chat box what's happening for you. What's alive? Is it your heart? Is it your mind? Is it your soul? Is it your body? For me, most times I'm experiencing these things through my body, right in my shoulder area. So I appreciate the time to kind of breathe and reminding me just to release it and let it out of my body, because I start to hold it all in and I feel myself getting tighter. And then all my heart space is also triggered by these um, um, experiences of hearing the stories, and it brings up a sense of longing for me in my emotional space, a longing for justice, a longing to know more, and a deep passion and empathy for my own people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all for lighting up the chat box. Thank you for being engaged. Did anyone wrestle with the question that was posed? In what ways can I change my perspective in light of my increase in cultural empathy and understanding of people from various backgrounds? Mhm. I'm reading Sheldon's comments of they had to force themselves to believe Africans were not human. Yeah, I think that's what we still wrestle with. Um, and what this, even going through Black history and being mindful of the story of Black Americans, it should also teach us about how we should be responding now to immigration and how it is that we continue to other humans and have to somehow create a narrative for ourselves that makes them less, so that we can then treat them in less than humane ways.
I just want to touch back on this a little bit for people again. Disenfranchised grief is grief that people experience when they incur loss that is not or cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. And I believe one of the ways someone had mentioned in the chat about moving on and moving forward, when we speak of empathy and really taking the time to put ourselves in that place as best as we can. Obviously, we can't fully do that. But if you go there to the place of trying to imagine what it feels like to have to sacrifice children, family members, um, your life for someone else's greed, thinking of now understanding I was a human being and now all I exist is as someone's property, not even considered human. And I seen in the chat where someone wrote that they had to convince themselves that people were not human beings. And it's all at the core, honestly, of greed. That is the answer. And in my opinion, it was just greed. Um, and unfortunately, if we don't check greed wherever it shows up, it would not be surprising that things like this could happen or other things will happen worse, all because of the love of money. Not that money is bad, people are greedy and we choose to do these things. So we have to be conscious and go back into those spaces and not ignore it, not be dismissive, and not try to quiet the voices of people that are talking, and really be engaged and try to come to the point, that process of empathy. And again, in just listening to the video, again, we talked about acknowledging privilege that is here, that exists, that slavery paid for. People of color paid for some of the luxuries and the benefits that we yet have. And I think one of the ways we can get in touch with it, although there's not a law in place for Blacks to receive reparations, what can we be doing to contribute to some causes where I know I've been a beneficiary of something that I didn't work for, my ancestors did not work for? Where have I reaped where I can now sow to this group of people? And that is one of the ways that you may consider doing something. And when we see anything that is unjust, laws that are in place, unjust sentences, being silent about things, where we see that there is a major gap in difference between education, supplies, resources, getting involved in those ways and never feeling like you have done enough and never also feeling like you have to constantly pay. I think that is also important as well. But I don't believe there's enough that we could ever do um, to completely right or wrong, one that we didn't create, but many of us are beneficiaries of in different ways. So as we will go into our candlelight ceremony, we will honor some of those things. Rhonda, how do you feel about anybody that may have something to say at this time?
Yeah. Yeah, if folks want to come off mute and kind of process out loud a little bit before we go into the candlelight ceremony, by all means do so. I'm reading some of the comments in the chat box. A lot of people have shared. For me, it's taking this time and being able to talk about grief, because in our country, in the way that we do things in our United States culture, we're not really good at honoring grief and recognizing grief. So Rosalind, when you talked about like bereavement coming from that word of bereft, being robbed, I think that's just so appropriate for how we talk about and look at this time, all the ways in which that Black Americans have been robbed of our own humanity, not only just our humanity, but then in ways of being able to have a sustainable living for a lot of our families over the years. And to I think Claire's point, not only does the people who position themselves to be the oppressor rob us, but you're robbing yourself too. Is that right, Claire? Am I getting that correct? What you're saying, that the stripping away of the humanity of another person, you're also stripping away your own humanity?
Yeah,
How could you claim to be fully human and do things like this?
Yeah.
And yeah, and it continues.
Yeah. So yeah, those are just kind of like my thoughts and what I'm thinking and experiencing right now. If anybody else want to share, by all means, feel free.
I love the context of this. I think I know I get so wrapped up in the grief of today, and the oppression and the grief it has caused, the harm it has caused to great amounts of people. And I guess I really never thought about the embedded grief within the culture either, because I was so focused on the here and now. I'm intellectually very aware of all the atrocities, and anytime I see anything or read anything, I'm grieving, I'm crying my eyes out. I can't even imagine living with that history of, my people having been treated so poorly. So thank you for this. I really appreciate the context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's really it's the ways we have been embodying this grief for a long time. And for, I don't know if you're going to speak to this somewhat, Rosalind, or not, but the ways for us as Black Americans, how this has shown up for us in present day, or in what ways would you, how would you tell us here that are part of the group that are Black Americans, how would you talk to us to help us think about what we should be doing? I think taking this time is definitely important too, but I think sometimes we don't always, as Black Americans, we just live with it. It's so much of our story. We embody it so much that we don't really fully consciously think about, oh, this is some grief at work. Some, like, I'm never able, how that show up when you are going through microaggressions, or you meet up. I've been in plenty of conversations with white people where they just be like, just why you can't get over it, but why you got to keep bringing that up, why you can't get over it, or I didn't do it. I had a training last summer where those exact words were spoken. I wasn't the one who did it. Why do we have to keep talking about that? So how would you tell us as Black Americans, if you have some thoughts about that? I mean, maybe you're processing it yourself, but how do we start to manage ourselves with this disenfranchised grief? How do we move forward? Maybe some individual ways, but collectively, how do we help each other through this grief?
I believe, and definitely don't have all the answers, but I believe, one, acknowledging it. Some people, I really believe people of color, not really understanding and knowing the history of how things were taught. Most of our introduction to Black history was through a public school for many of us. And what we were taught, and not understanding that some of it was true, but a lot of it was untrue. Really understanding that we were people of value. So I think, one, getting proper education, taking time, making it important to you. The other thing, I believe that once you get the importance in the education and understanding those same sacrifices that were made all the way, we didn't touch much on, like, civil rights movements and the benefits that we have, but the things that our ancestors endured was also for us. And so I think, making sure that we are doing the things that we need to do to honor the sacrifices that they made, and not be so filled with hate. Because, right, you have every right to, be angry, and all of those emotions that come, they should be validated. You should speak them and not try to hide them in. But at the same time, while you're acknowledging feelings and emotions that are happening, you also have to take in the responsibility of what you should be doing, as a citizen that is here, to make sure that this, one, never happens again, and that you are not being, and I hate to almost say this, but the animal that they said that you were, that you're not acting out in that manner, validating people who still even believe that. So we don't want to become what they said we were, because we're not. We never will be animals, but we don't want to have that behavior that resemble or those stereotypes to be true. So I think expressing it, talking about it, and calling people, sometimes when you hear those comments that people are saying who are not educated, they don't understand, being able to talk to them about why this still matters, why this still hurts, because they can't fully really understand that, and understanding that they won't be able to, you know. And so, and being okay with that is some things you do have to accept, and then you have to move forward and on from, but
Yeah.
not just walking around like it doesn't exist, or taking on that whole idea too, because you have people of color that are like that too, that was then we got so many opportunities, this, that, and the other, and there are opportunities, but when we've built the table that I have to now apply to sit at, that is very disheartening for a lot of people.
Right. That's a good way to say it. We built the table that we got to apply to sit at, and I don't even know if sometimes they ain't even taking applications. So yeah, but I think that's good. And so even in that sense of what you're just saying there, Rosalind, that sometimes I think for us as people of color, especially Black people, because we have embodied this grief, we may act out, and we act out that trauma basically. And we may not be even able to locate that it is that disenfranchised grief at work, but that's what we're actually manifesting. And so I think, so having this time and doing something like this for me, and having conversations about racism, it's been very important to acknowledge grief. And so when Rosalind started this work and started putting this program together, I knew it was perfect to come alongside the work that I was already doing, because a part of Race and Faith is, again, we're acknowledging the whole person. So we're not just trying to educate you with facts, but we're really trying to engage you as the human you are, heart to heart, person to person, and really trying to make real change, because a lot of people get a lot of information, very smart, and still very racist. So it's not just enough to get information, but we really have to change at our heart space. We really have to be able to get deeper. So this is perfect for me. And perfect for Race and Faith. I developed last summer, a document. It's a grief ritual. I created a grief ritual. It's based in West African traditions. And the grief ritual is for I have one for white people, and I also have one for people of color. And so as we wrap up and we get toward the ends of this, I will put my email out there again, or I'll put my email in the chat box. And if you're interested in receiving that grief ritual, you can email me and let me know, and I will gladly try to send that to you. But if nobody else has any other comments or anything else to add, I think, Rosalind, we can move on to the candlelight.
Okay. I had a series, and I was telling Rhonda with the timeline, I'm like, I didn't go through my timeline of facts, but that's okay. That's totally okay. I do want to say I don't want to diminish any of the progress that we've made here in America. We didn't want to come really from that focus of just kind of highlighting first Black president. Voters' rights, of course, is very important, things like that. We wanted to kind of stay in the space of grief and loss, and like Rhonda said, working from a holistic approach with Race and Faith on recognizing this grief, this loss, and speaking to it, giving it honor, a memorial. And so that's what I'm going to do. I actually, let me get my lighter. Okay,
Oh,
yeah,
I
you
got
can.
my light. Anybody else got their candle or anything?
We are so sorry, Ron. I think I forgot to mention to have for Rhonda to have people do that. I'm just going to put up in my share again for people that may want to connect if they want to get a
Oh,
screenshot.
Miss Henrietta got her candle.
Okay.
Get
Yes,
ready. Be the
most
light.
of us have something somewhere in the
Candle,
house.
right? Even if it's a birthday candle, you know.
Um, just quickly, if you want to connect with me, if you have information to share, if I can provide more activities and resources, feel free to definitely ask. One of the things I just want to speak of, we know our children are the future, and just teaching them early how to grieve and to mourn is very important. because they make up the next generations of decisions and lifestyles and things like that. So you can email me at information@Grace Greek Gratitude. Facebook is the same as well as Instagram. Definitely can connect with me through Rhonda as well. I do have some gratitude workbook journals. We will be going through a guided practice to help people mourning from the perspective of gratitude and working through some of those emotions as well. If you are interested in something like that, feel free to reach out to me and I can get you more information.
You mentioned this, Miss Roslyn, gratitude journal.
Yeah, that's what I was just mentioning.
Okay, so this is a very detailed gratitude journal that Miss Roslyn created. One person will be the lucky recipient.
Are you showing it, Rhonda?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it away at the end of this, at our end of our time together. So I will, you'll hear through the end, I'll randomly pull a name, and whoever name I pull will receive this wonderful gratitude journal.
And so if you want one and want to be a part of it, you can definitely let me know and I can get one to you. Okay, let me slide down here to, let me get my share going again. Okay. All right. Slide. Okay, there we go. So we're going to do a candlelight ceremony. I have 4 candles here, and I'm going to light each one. I'll hold them up because I don't know if they can see it like clearly or not. I don't know. But I'll hold them up. And what I'm going to invite you to actually do, to come into the moment with me. As I'm lighting, I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes, center yourself. And then once we get ready to blow out the candle, when I'm done reading, you can feel free to open your eyes. And I'll give you a moment to take it in. So I'm going to light right now. Slide it. We remember your losses that you were unable to grieve. Your children, your wives, husbands, grandparents, aunts, uncles, children. We acknowledge the land and property that was stolen from you. Your identity that was stripped away from you. I blow this candle for you. Lighting my second candle here. Slide it. Determination. We are determined to never forget you. Through your legacy, your words, your interactions, our votes, no longer being silent. We choose no longer to be ignorant. We educate ourselves. We inform others. We light this candle for you. I blow this candle for you, for us. Third candle. We honor your contributions that we are now beneficiaries of. We honor your contributions. We honor your sacrifices. We honor you. I blow this candle for you. Our final and fourth candle. Candle is lighted. We light this candle as a light of love, of your love and your activism. You gave your love, you gave your life, you gave an example. We honor, we remember you. We will carry the torch. We will be active, small ways, large ways, big ways, when it is uncomfortable for us. We honor, we remember, we reflect. Happy Black History Month, everyone. Thank you.
Happy Black History Month. Ashe.
Ashe. I'm going to end it now, Rhonda.
Thank you all for participating in this beautiful time of reflection, of remembering, of honoring. I'm blessed to share this space with you all, to share this time with Rosalind, and really believing that our ancestors are pleased with this time. And our mother is now an ancestor, and I can't help but to believe Rosalind is my sister. I can't help but to believe and know Mom will be so happy with this moment, knowing that we've both come together in this way to contribute to healing, because our mother was definitely a healer in her own way. And so this is about our collective healing as we restore our collective memory. And so please continue to create a wider narrative, practice that cultural empathy Rosalind spoke of. And if you need to learn more about disenfranchised grief, the book is in the chat box. Again, if this was something that was beneficial to you in any way, please be sure to follow Rosalind and follow Race and Faith. You can always email us. And if you want the ritual, again, the grief rituals that I wrote last year, just send me a message and let me know. And finally, this event was definitely put on free of charge, but we do take donations. So if you want to contribute and make a donation to Race and Faith, I put our website in the chat box. It's raceandfaith.org/donate. And your donation will be greatly appreciated. Again, let's keep moving forward in peace and power. Most importantly, let's move forward in love. So good evening and good night. Thank you.
Good night, and we enjoy you all.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good night, ladies. Thank you all. It's been
Have a good night. You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming,
Thank
Shelly.
you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Darrow. I know you said you was driving, so thank you for participating.
Nikki,
You're welcome.
thank you for being a real one.
Period. This was beautiful.
Nikki A.
Oh, Nikki.
You came late, Nikki Hill, dog.
I'm like, why y'all didn't remind us?
Let me see that I stopped the. Oh, you still got the recording, Rhonda. Wait a minute. We gotta stop the recording.
This was beautiful. Good job.
Thank you.